In this installment of the VIP Test Modeler 101 training series, we're going to be creating and passing subprocess parameters. The goal of this session is that by the end you will understand subprocess parameters and when they should be used, and also be able to use parameters and pass test data variables between subflows. Often subprocesses will need to talk with each other and share variables between them. To handle this, there is the concept of subprocess parameters. These allow you to pass variables and values into subprocesses which have been set from elsewhere in the model. Here we have an example screen which allows us to embed test data variables as arguments into a subprocess. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the login flow we built, we're going to expose a parameter for passing a valid username and a valid password, and then we're going to set the valid username and password from the master process. In the advanced modeling chapter, we will pass a username and password from the registration process into our login flow. So let's jump into Test Modeler and get started. Okay, so I'm just back in the login flow that we created throughout the series so far. And the first thing we're going to do here is expose a parameter for passing in a valid username and valid password. Now, to do that, we're going to go into the test data panel up here. We're going to go into variables and we're going to add two new variables. The first variable we're going to add is valid username. And what we'll do here is we'll go into the advanced option and you'll see there's an option here to expose this as a flow parameter. So we'll tick this box. Now, what's useful when we're creating parameters is to give them a default value so that if this value is not populated whenever the subprocess is called, we've got something in here to fall back on. So what we'll do here is we'll put in the valid username from our Magento website and we'll click save. And there we have it. Now what we're going to do is we'll add another parameter in here, which is going to be for the valid password. And again, we're going to expose this as a flow parameter, which we're going to override from our master flow. And again, we'll add a default value in here, which is the password from our Magento system. And we'll click save. Now we have these two variables available, the valid username and the valid password, which can be overridden when this flow is embedded. So we'll hit save there. Now what we need to do is use these variables inside our model. So what we'll do is we'll change how our username and password are being set as we go across the model. So now, instead of pulling out a synthetic data value, what we're going to do here is we're going to click the edit button. Whenever we pass through the valid username block, we're going to pull out this value from our parameter. All we have to do is select the variable we want to embed, click insert reference, and that becomes available. And we'll hit save. And we just need to do the same here for the valid password. So again, we'll hit the edit button, we'll delete what's in this box already, we'll hit the equals button and we'll insert a reference to the valid password variable and click save. Now we're just going to do the same across the rest of the model. We can just copy and paste our expression in here and we'll do the same for the valid username here as well, as so. Now, just to show you what's going on in the background, I'm going to hit save. I'm going to go in and do a regenerate, and what we'll do here is download the data sheet to have a look. So what you'll see here is that we've got a few more variables inside our sheet. We've got the valid username and valid password here, which are obviously the same throughout all of our tests, and this time the login email and the login password, if we take a look, of referencing the valid username and valid password fields. So we'll see in here the cell references that have come through and been mapped by Test Modeler. So that's what's happening in the background. Obviously, you don't need to be exposed to this in Test Modeler, but it is useful to know how this is working. So I'll close this Excel sheet and we've saved the model. So what we'll do now is we will reopen our order processing flow, which is where we embedded the subflows in the last video. So we'll open this up here, as so. Now, if I right click on our subflow here, there's an option to open a subflow properties. So let's bring that open, and what you'll see now is that our two parameters are available here, the valid username and the valid password. Now we can come in here and I can enter some static data. So we may override the username with a static email here, and we could override the password as well. We'll click save, We'll save our model and we'll go off and we'll perform a generate. 5 parts have come back. And let's download the datasheet here again to take a look at what's happened. So if we go in here and we take a look at the values inside each of these columns, so what you'll see is that the valid username and the valid password have been replaced with the values we entered in our master flow. And also along with that, the email and password we're using have flown through from those parameters. Now we can also embed variables in here inside our parameters, and that's pretty simple. So if I go into the variables panel here and let's create a new variable, valid username master, and we'll enter a default value for that and hit save. What we can do now is we can just copy the identifier here, so our variable is valid username master, hit save, right click on the Subflow properties, and we can use a test data variable in here. All we have to do is hit the equals button, 2 square brackets, and inside that we're just going to reference the variable name, and this will get injected into that subflow. So we could use some data here which has been set throughout the model and then pass it in as a parameter. And this is exactly what we're going to be doing in the next installment in our advanced modeling scenarios, where we will model a registration screen, and once we have a valid user registered, we will log in as that user into our application by passing variables and parameters into our subprocess. Thanks for watching this video. Any questions, please email james.walker@curiosity.software.